Hello, my name is Paula Powell, and today I will be presenting research from my dissertation study entitled Exploring Jamaican Teachers' Subjectivities in Post-Colonial Education and Autoethnography and Narrative Inquiry. To begin, I'd like to provide an introduction to Jamaica and the education system there. Jamaica is the largest island in the English-speaking Caribbean with a population of 2.93 million. The history is deeply rooted in slavery, but following the abolition of slavery in 1834, a stratified society emerged, and Jamaicans of Black ancestry were co-signed to the lowest class. Over time, all Jamaicans have come to view schooling as being analogous to upward mobility. So with that said, schools have certainly grown in diversity. However, equity and inclusivity continue to be problematic. Now, researchers have found that the colonial encounters have shaped the culture. Therefore, those encounters have impacted the food, the language, the political system, the religious perspectives, the education system, and so on. Since 2008, there has been a spike in poverty, with 21.2% of the population living below the poverty line. Of this number, children make up 25% of those affected. And in the education sector, in 2017, a report by the National Education Inspectorate revealed that 79% of schools did not meet the Ministry of Education's targets in English and mathematics. Now, these challenges are asserted by researchers to be directly tied to the colonial experience. But the push to reduce poverty and illiteracy rates is nothing new to the island. Elected in 1972, then Prime Minister Michael Manley advocated for an egalitarian approach to schooling. He argued that the curriculum should not focus solely on academics, but that it should also consider economic and social factors. Today, Vision 2030 Jamaica is the main influence on education goals. The plan is based on a shared vision to advance Jamaica as a developed country in the global context. Bearing this in mind, the last budget, which was read in 2020, within that budget, $117 billion was allocated to the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. This was $5 billion more than the previous year, and it's the largest allocation to any ministry ever. The justification for such a large allocation is that education is a key indicator of economic development and future growth. However, one must consider whether money can sufficiently address the goal of attaining the education sector plan of Vision 2030 Jamaica. Bearing this in mind, the following statement of problem was developed. So Jamaican education continues to exhibit characteristics of colonialism 200 years post-slavery, and researchers have really addressed these legacies in their work. For example, Frank focused on the exclusion of Jamaican Creole from the curriculum, and Ruth identified the one-size-fits-all curriculum as an aspect of schooling that perpetuates colonial legacies. At the same time, teaching and learning artifacts such as textbooks have been sources of colonial reproduction in post-colonial countries. And the students who matriculate to teachers' colleges have been leaving their preparation programs unprepared to resist the legacies of colonialism. But while the curriculum has been reformed to reflect an increased Caribbean attitude, the focus on Western ideologies and the continued developmental challenges have resulted in the failure to effect real changes to the education sector. This research therefore aims to explore the role of colonial legacies in Jamaican education. As a researcher, I'm interested in learning how teachers' subjectivities impacts teaching and learning in post-colonial societies. I'm also interested in learning how teachers resist or reproduce colonial legacies in their work. Now, the philosophical definition of subjectivity is being used in this study, and the definition holds that subjectivity is the manipulation of Black subjects through the use of the white liberal ethos. This therefore results in Black subjects becoming tokens of whiteness. The following questions will guide this study. How have the legacies of British colonialism impacted education in Jamaica? What characteristics of British colonialism can be traced to modern-day education in Jamaica? What role do teacher-educator programs and the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information play in reproducing colonial characteristics? And finally, how have the legacies of colonialism influenced teachers' concept of social justice? The study will be grounded in two theoretical frameworks. The first is post-colonial theory. Proponents of this theory argue that colonialism created an imbalance between developed countries and developing countries. Former colonies have therefore remained dependent on developed countries for support despite their independence. And for this reason, Young has referred to independence as an illusion, asserting that modernity and globalization continues to play a fundamental role in the development of former colonies. Post-colonial theorists therefore seek to turn the world upside down by examining the legacies of colonialism in the present. The second theoretical framework is culturally responsive teaching. Now, this framework is more of a pedagogical framework, and it's rooted in the tenets of critical theory. Now, critical theorists challenge what we think we know as a way of identifying power imbalance in an unjust society. They claim that knowledge is the basis for power and that knowledge wars have been used over time to subjugate the other. For Gay and Ladson-Billings, CRT is essential for disrupting the cycle of marginalization, particularly in urban schools. The pedagogies emphasize equity and excellence among those who have been ostracized because of their race. Now, why is this study significant? Now, while the study may not immediately impact education reform or teacher practice in Jamaica, it underscores the complexity of education in developing countries. The study will add to the body of literature surrounding the disruption of coloniality and positivistic views. In addition, the study will fill the critical awareness gap associated with pedagogical practice and curriculum development in Jamaica. And although a number of studies have examined the effects of colonialism in former colonies, the literature is sparse when it comes to the subjectivities of educators and how they resist or reproduce colonial legacies in their work. In reviewing the literature, a number of themes emerge. Due to time constraints today, I will provide a brief overview of a few of the categories. Now, the first theme to be addressed is the education system after colonialism. Now, the first post-independence reform on education came at the turn of the 1970s when Manley won the general election. Manley was among a group of leaders in the Caribbean that sought to reject capitalism through his vision of identifying a third path for the nation. In 1993, another reform would come by the way of the Rose Program, the Reform on Secondary Education Program. It was launched to address issues related to education quality, curriculum development, teacher training, and lack of infrastructure. Later in 2004, a task force on educational reform recommended the immediate implementation of a remediation program, a citizenship education program to curb violent tendencies and reorient student values, and changes to assessment practices to ensure that assessment was not only being used for student placement in school. The next theme is the categorization of schools. So the public school system consists of 4 main levels: early childhood, primary schools, high schools, and tertiary. In terms of interventions, in 2010, the Ministry of Education introduced the Performance Proficiency Pathway. So it's a component of the ministry's accountability system that holds employees accountable for student outcomes. Another major theme that emerged is the national standards curriculum. So recommendations was made back in 2004 to really revise the curriculum. And as a result, the NSC was born. Now this curriculum shifted focus towards increasing students' confidence and productivity, developing awareness of identity and citizenship, and ensuring that graduates are successful lifelong learners. High stakes testing is another theme. The literature suggested that just like the United States, Jamaica has a testing culture. Students must take the grade 4 literacy and numeracy test, the primary exit profile to attend high school or to be placed in high school at grade 7, the Caribbean Secondary Education Certificate, which is administered to students in grade 11, and the Caribbean Advanced Proficiency Examination, which is an optional examination for students who attend grades 12 and 13. Teacher training was another theme identified. Now, according to Roof and Miller, the theory-based curriculum using teacher preparation programs have been identified as a factor that affects teacher quality. The teacher training curriculum must therefore be reformed to meet the demands of Vision 2030 Jamaica. Bilingual education is another major theme that was identified in the literature. Now, Jamaica inherited an education system where English as the mother tongue approach is used. Jamaican Creole has long been positioned as an illegitimate language and is widely viewed as a fragmented language of a fragmented people. So the diglossia in Jamaica, it must be understood, is one where the spoken language is not necessarily the written language, and the written language is not the spoken language for the general population. To address the dilemma, the bilingual education project was piloted between 2004 and 2008. This was 15 years after the National Association of Teachers of English recommended the use of the Jamaican Creole in schools. Although the BEP pilot was regarded as a success, the Ministry of Education concluded that it was not suitable since public opinion had been negative and there was no standardized writing system in place. The final themes are instructional practices and research on CRT. So according to Roof, learning is only possible if teaching is context responsive. She therefore recommended that emphasis on high stakes testing in schools be pushed aside and the process of teaching and learning be humanized. In terms of CRT, Brown, Jeffy, and Cooper developed their own conceptual framework and proposed 5 themes within that framework. The 5 themes are identity and achievement, equity and excellence, developmental appropriateness, teaching the whole child, and student-teacher relationships. The 5 themes will be used in this study. The themes were used to develop the culturally responsive lesson plans and assignment rubric, which is a researcher-developed rubric. In terms of my methodology, the qualitative research design is being used. Within that design, I will be using 2 qualitative traditions. The first is autoethnography. According to Ellis and Boschner, this tradition gives researchers the freedom to consider personal experience in their work. Although the method places the researcher's experience at the center of the process, Paulus contends that it is still a data-driven technique that uses writing as the main form of inquiry. The second tradition is narrative inquiry, which is used to understand participants' experiences. Now, since I'll be recruiting teachers to participate in this study, Clendenin and Colony spoke about teachers' experiences being studied narratively because they lead storied lives. Now, the narratives that will be explored within this study will construct counter stories to the master narrative regarding teacher practice in the Jamaican educational setting. The study will be conducted in 4 phases. So in the first phase, I will reconstruct my personal narratives of being a student within 3 of the 4 main levels of schooling in Jamaica during the post-Manley era. In the second phase, I will use second-order narratives to highlight the experiences of the teachers. In the third phase, I will analyze documents such as curriculums and lesson plans. And in the fourth and final phase, I will engage in deep and purposeful reflection of the constructed narratives, personal narratives, and the documents. No more than 10 teachers will be recruited for this study. A snowball sampling technique is being used. I will contact the principals at the sites identified to get recommendations for potential participants. According to COSA, this method highlights the researcher's level of respect for the school's hierarchical culture and might also justify the participants' role in the study. So veteran teachers will be sought. So those teachers who have a minimum of 10 years experience and who teach at an urban primary school or high school. Teachers must also work or teach, therefore, in the history department, English language department, English literature department, or social studies department. And finally, they must have attended a teacher educator program in the British Caribbean. Semi-structured interviews will be used, and of course, the documents will be reviewed. I will seek IRB approval prior to collecting any data. All participants will sign a consent form. Interviews will be audio recorded and video recorded via Zoom, and interviews will be transcribed. The use of two qualitative approaches will help ensure dependable and credible results. Methodological triangulation according to Denzin will result from the use of multiple qualitative traditions. In addition, member checks will be performed to strengthen the findings, and an audit trail will be used to detail each step of the research process. The three-dimensional narrative inquiry space proposed by Clendenin and Connolly will be used to analyze the data. So within this three-dimensional narrative inquiry space, there are 5 dimensions. The first dimension is inward, which will look at the internal conditions or emotions of the participants. Outward, which will look at the environmental conditions. Backward, which will look at the past experiences of participants. Forward, which will look at the present and future experiences of participants. And place, which will look at the physical boundaries within the inquiry space. Of course, there are some limitations. So since I'm using a qualitative design, the findings of the study cannot be generalized. And due to the fact that I myself am a teacher and I attended school in Jamaica, I might over-identify with my participants. In terms of implications, teachers who fail to view classrooms through a culturally responsive lens run the risk of reproducing colonial legacies in their work. And to achieve Vision 2030 Jamaica, it is really critical for urban teachers working in Jamaican classrooms to re-envision curriculum as lived and not just as planned. Finally, teachers must work to integrate histories and experiences if they are to produce students who are critically and culturally conscious. These are my selected references. Thank you for joining me today. Please feel free to reach out to me using my email contact if you have any questions. Thank you.